Welcome to the dairies of science fiction, where extraordinary stories come to life. Enjoy the journey. The ship had already crashed. No one dared to go inside. They said whoever entered would never return. But deep in the wreck, an alien queen was still alive, and only one human stepped forward. Rion Valdez had been staring at the same blinking red light on his console for 3 hours when the universe decided to get interesting. The light represented a faulty coolant valve in Bay 7, which meant either a 2-hour spacewalk in a suit held together by optimism and electrical tape, or ignoring it and hoping the bay didn't explosively decompress. He'd been leaning toward option 2. Then the sensors screamed. Not the polite beeping that meant another chunk of war debris had drifted into scanning range, but the full-throated wail that made everyone on Kepler station remember they were living in a glorified tin held together by gravity anchors and collective delusion. Rion's coffee, which had been achieving a perfect state of lukewarm disappointment, sloshed across his keyboard. "Are you kidding me?" He grabbed for the mug, succeeded only in knocking it completely over, and watched brown liquid seep into the gap between his Z and X keys. The sensors didn't care about his loss. They kept screaming. The comm crackled to life with Commander Yashi's voice, already tired, and it wasn't even noon station time. "All personnel, we have an unidentified vessel on collision course with asteroid K7. Salvage teams, this is not a drill, though I wish it were because I haven't had lunch." Rion pulled up the scan data and felt something cold settle in his stomach that had nothing to do with the station's perpetually broken climate control. The ship was massive, easily dreadnought class, but its signature was all wrong. The hull composition didn't match anything in the database, which went back 200 years and included every known species from the Convergence War. The energy readings pulsed in patterns that looked almost organic, like a heartbeat captured in radiation. "That's ascendancy," breathed Polk, the station's resident conspiracy theorist and surprisingly competent waste recycling technician, over the open channel. "Has to be. Look at those bioenergy signatures." "The ascendancy vanished 30 years ago," Yashi replied, but her voice had lost its casual exhaustion. "They're myths, scary stories to keep cargo pilots alert in deep space. Myths don't show up on sensors with hull integrity at 15% and dropping." Rion watched the ship plow into K7 with the terrible grace of something that had already accepted death. The impact sent debris flowering outward in a slow-motion catastrophe, chunks of asteroid and alien metal spinning off into the black. What remained of the vessel lodged itself in the crater it had created, stuck like a knife in rotting wood. The comm channels erupted. Every salvage crew on the station was shouting about claim rights, about the potential payload, about the sheer impossibility of what they were seeing. Rion had worked Kepler station for 6 years, pulling apart the corpses of destroyed ships and selling their organs to the highest bidder. He'd seen Terran destroyers, Klavan mining barges, even a Cynthian pleasure yacht that had somehow ended up in a war zone. But this was different. This was first contact with something that wasn't supposed to exist anymore. "All teams stand down," Yashi's voice cut through the chaos. "I'm implementing a level 5 quarantine on that wreck. Nobody approaches until we've run full analysis. The radiation alone could turn you inside out." Rion pulled up his personal financial file, a masochistic habit he'd developed over the years. The numbers glowed red with an enthusiasm that would have been admirable if it wasn't representing his debt to the station company. 3 more months at his current salvage rate, and he could buy out his contract. 3 more months of breathing recycled air that tasted like someone else's lunch and fixing coolant valves that should have been replaced during the previous administration. Or one big score. He looked at the wreck data again. The ship was dying, its energy signature fading like a candle in vacuum. Whatever was inside wouldn't stay preserved for long. And if Yashi locked it down with official protocols, the Galactic Authority would swoop in, claim everything, and Rion would get nothing except another red light on his console that needed fixing. Terrible idea, he told himself, already pulling up the bay assignments for the solo pods. Supremely stupid. Your mother would be so disappointed. Bay 12 had a pod that technically wasn't supposed to be operational, which meant no one was monitoring it, which meant no one would notice if it happened to take an unauthorized field trip. Rion grabbed his pressure suit from its locker, noting the patch on the left arm where he'd fixed a tear with a piece of a cereal box and sealant. The helmet's heads-up display flickered when he powered it on, then stabilized into something approaching functionality. You know what's out there? That was Chen, one of the senior salvage operators, catching him at the bay door. Something that killed its own crew, something that's leaking radiation in 4 different spectrums. Something that the Ascendancy, who could reshape matter with their thoughts according to the stories, abandoned in deep space. Sounds like it's having a worse day than me, Rion said, keying the bay door open. This isn't funny. People who go into Ascendancy wrecks don't come back, or they come back wrong. Chen, I appreciate the concern, truly, but I've been wrong my entire life. How much worse could it get? The pod was cramped, designed for one person and maybe a small, very depressed cat. Rion strapped in and ran through the pre-flight with the efficiency of long practice. The engines hummed to life with a sound like a refrigerator having an existential crisis. Outside the station, the wreck waited in the starlight, a dark shape against darker space, beautiful and wrong in ways that made his eyes hurt if he looked too long. As he disengaged from the station, Yashi's voice crackled over the comm. Valdez, if that's you in Pod 12, turn around right now. I'm not kidding. I will dock your pay for the next year. Commander, my pay's already docked for the next 3 years. You'll have to threaten me with something scarier than poverty. How about your life? Rion aimed the pod toward the wreck, watching it grow larger in his viewport. Up close, it was even stranger. The hull seemed to shift in the light, patterns flowing across its surface like oil on water. Organic and mechanical, grown and built, alive and dead all at once. Yeah, he said quietly, that might do it. The airlock on the alien ship opened like a wound, edges peeling back with a sound that Rion felt more than heard, a vibration that traveled through his boots and settled in his teeth. His suit's atmospheric sensors immediately started complaining, displaying a cocktail of gases that would have killed him in about 40 different ways if he'd been stupid enough to remove his helmet. He wasn't that stupid. Today. The interior corridor stretched ahead, walls ribbed with what looked like bone or maybe cartilage, lit by bioluminescent veins that pulsed with a sickly blue-green light. Rion's headlamp cut through the dimness and he immediately wished it hadn't. The walls were covered in symbols that hurt to look at, geometric patterns that seemed to shift when he wasn't looking directly at them. Definitely not in the salvage manual, he muttered, checking his scanner. The device was having some kind of crisis, numbers flickering between readings that made no sense. Temperature showed as both freezing and superheated. Radiation levels bounced from safe to lethal and back again. You and me both, buddy. He moved deeper into the ship, following the strongest energy signature his malfunctioning equipment could agree on. The corridor opened into chambers that might have been living quarters or religious shrines or modern art installations, impossible to tell. Furniture grew from the floor in organic curves. What might have been control panels sprouted from walls like fungi. Everything was connected, threaded together with those glowing veins that pulsed with irregular rhythm. A heartbeat. The ship had a heartbeat. Okay, that's deeply unsettling, Rion said to the empty corridor, because talking to yourself in a haunted alien wreck was definitely the first sign of mental stability. His boot caught on something and he looked down to see what might have been a body, or at least pieces of one. The Ascendancy, according to the stories, had been humanoid. This suggested the stories were told by people who'd been very drunk or very creative with their definitions. The remains were too tall, too many joints in the limbs, the skull elongated in ways that made him think of deep-sea fish. "Sorry about that," he told the corpse, stepping over it carefully. "Hope you had a good life, or existence, or whatever your people called it." The energy signature led him down, always down, through chambers that grew progressively stranger. One room was filled with crystalline structures that chimed softly as he passed, like a wind chime made of frozen music. Another held what looked like a garden, but the plants were metallic and reached toward him as he walked by, leaves of hammered silver trembling with something that might have been curiosity. Then he found the throne room, because of course there was a throne room. It was massive, a cathedral of alien architecture that made him feel like an ant at a giant's funeral. The ceiling vanished into darkness overhead. Pillars rose like fossilized trees, their surfaces carved with more of those reality-bending symbols. And at the center, on a raised dais, suspended in a column of flickering energy, was her. Rion's breath caught. She hung there, motionless, arms spread in a position that was either crucifixion or flight. He couldn't tell which. 4 arms, he realized, not 2. Her skin was the color of deep water, shifting between blue and purple and black depending on how the light hit it. Bioluminescent patterns traced across her body in lines that might have been tattoos or might have been part of her biology, currently pulsing so faintly he could barely see them. Her face was long, elegant, with eyes that were closed but too large for humanity, set in a skull that swept back into a crown of bone that looked both grown and crafted. She wore something between armor and formal dress, made of a material that flowed like fabric but had the sheen of metal, and she was dying. He didn't need his scanner to tell him that. The stasis field around her flickered, failing, and each time it did her bioluminescent patterns dimmed a little more. "Well," Rion said, "this complicates things." The rational part of his brain, the part that had kept him alive through 6 years of salvage work, was screaming at him to leave, to run back to his pod, seal the airlock, and let someone else deal with alien royalty trapped in a failing stasis field. The irrational part, which had always been louder, was already trying to figure out how the field worked. He approached the dais, scanner held out like a holy ward. The field crackled, energy arcing between nodes that jutted from the floor like teeth. The scanner's display finally settled on something approaching coherent data. The field was failing because the ship's power core was dying. Simple, terrifying but simple. "Okay," he told the unconscious alien queen, "I'm going to do something incredibly stupid now. If you wake up and immediately kill me, I want you to know I think that's very rude." He found the control node, or what he hoped was the control node, a crystalline structure pulsing in sync with the field. When he touched it, the crystal felt warm and somehow alive, and information flooded into his mind in a way that definitely wasn't how information was supposed to work. He saw the ship's death, the betrayal, the queen being sealed away by her own people while they fled. He saw worlds beyond counting, civilizations rising and falling, and through it all the luminari, architects of living things, shepherds of consciousness itself. Then he saw his own hand yanking back from the crystal, because apparently even cosmic visions had their limits. "Note to self," he gasped, "don't touch the glowing things." But he'd understood enough. The field had a manual release, a failsafe for emergency extraction. He found the control sequence carved into the dais itself, symbols that now made a terrible kind of sense in his head. He pressed them in order, and the field collapsed. She fell, and Rion lunged forward on pure instinct, catching her despite the fact that she had to outweigh him by at least 50 pounds and had 4 arms that he wasn't sure how to arrange. They went down together in a tangle of limbs, human and alien, and hit the floor hard enough to knock the wind out of him. Her eyes opened. They were the color of stars being born, white and gold and terrible. Then the ship's core gave its final pulse and every light went out, plunging them into absolute darkness. In that darkness, Rion heard her take a breath, long and shuddering, the first breath of someone who'd been drowning. "So," he said into the black, still holding an alien queen who might vaporize him at any moment, My name's Rion. I'm here to rescue you. This is going really well so far. Something that might have been laughter echoed in the darkness, or might have been the ship dying around them. He wasn't sure which would be worse. Then her hand, one of four, found his shoulder in the dark and squeezed once, not crushing him, not killing him, just holding on. "Yeah," Rion said quietly, "let's get you out of here." The ship groaned its agreement, or its protest, and somewhere in the distance something expensive-sounding exploded. Getting back to the pod while carrying an unconscious alien queen through a dying ship turned out to be exactly as difficult as Rion had feared, with the added bonus of several problems he hadn't anticipated. Problem 1. Shavireth, as he'd learned her name through another accidental brush against a glowing crystal, weighed significantly more than she looked. Problem 2. The ship was collapsing around them, organic corridors contracting like a throat trying to swallow. Problem 3. She'd woken up halfway through the escape and decided his coffee maker was a weapon. "No, no, that's for drinking," Rion said, trying to pry the small appliance from her lower left hand while piloting the pod with his right. "It makes hot brown liquid that tastes like disappointment. It's harmless." Shavireth held the coffee maker at arm's length, her bioluminescent patterns flashing in sequences that his brain unhelpfully translated as extreme suspicion. Her other three hands were braced against the pod's walls as if ready to tear through the hull at any moment. She made a sound like wind chimes falling downstairs, and the translation device he'd pulled from her belt stuttered to life. "This device projects heat and pressure. Through contained explosion," the translator managed. "Weapon classification, probable." "Okay, technically yes, but also no. Look, I'll show you." He reached for the coffee maker and she yanked it away, patterns flashing what he was pretty sure was indignation. "Fine, keep the coffee maker. Consider it a welcome-to-the-neighborhood gift." She turned the appliance over in her hands, examining it with the intensity of someone defusing a bomb. Her main eyes, the large ones that took up half her face, were studying him while the smaller secondary eyes set higher on her skull tracked the pod's trajectory. It was deeply unsettling. She made the wind chime sound again. "Why did you extract this unit from dying vessel?" "Because you were dying in said vessel," Rion said, adjusting their approach to Kepler Station. The station filled his viewport, a lumpy collection of modules and docking rings that had all the aesthetic appeal of a shopping mall designed by committee. Generally considered polite to not let royalty suffocate in their own ship. Her patterns flashed through a rapid sequence. The translator wheezed. "This unit possesses knowledge of status." The giant bone crown was a pretty solid hint. She reached up with her upper right hand, touching the crown almost unconsciously. Up close, Rion could see it wasn't entirely bone. Parts of it were crystalline, others looked like mother-of-pearl, all of it growing from her skull in intricate spirals. She made a sound that the translator didn't even attempt to process. "The crown is burden," she finally said. "This unit is Shavireth is designation unclear, royal function terminated, life function grateful." "You're welcome, I'm Rion. And look, I don't want to alarm you, but that station we're heading toward, they're probably going to have some questions. Maybe put the coffee maker down before we dock." She clutched it tighter. The comm crackled to life before he could argue further. "Pod 12, this is Kepler Station Control. You are ordered to dock at Quarantine Bay Alpha and await hazmat procedures. Do not, and I cannot stress this enough, do not exit your pod until cleared. Control, this is Pod 12. I'm going to level with you. I have a guest who doesn't understand quarantine procedures and is currently armed with a coffee maker. Things might get weird." Static, then Yashi's voice, tight with the kind of anger that came from someone doing paperwork at 3 a.m. "Valdez, please tell me you didn't bring back something alive from that wreck." "I could tell you that. It would be a lie, but I could tell you that." More static, Rion imagined Yashi contemplating her life choices, which probably looked a lot like him contemplating his. "What exactly did you bring back?" He looked at Shavireth, who was now trying to drink from the coffee maker by pressing it against her face. Her bioluminescent patterns had shifted to something that might have been confusion or might have been frustration. Would you believe me if I said the Ascendancy's last queen? The silence on the comm stretched so long he thought the connection had died. Then, quietly, "Dock at Quarantine Alpha, I'm calling the Galactic Authority. And Valdez, you're fired." Added to my tab. The pod shuddered as it connected to the docking collar. The airlock cycled open, and a hazmat team stood waiting, looking like a collection of inflated yellow balloons arranged in roughly human shapes. The lead balloon gestured at them with something that might have been a scanner or might have been a weapon, hard to tell through the suit. "Both of you remain in the pod while we conduct preliminary scans," a muffled voice ordered. Shavireth's patterns flashed red, and Rion felt the pod's control panel heat up under his hands. The lights flickered. The hazmat team's equipment began sparking, their scanner displays all showing the same symbol that Rion had seen carved throughout her ship. "Shavireth," he said carefully, "I know being scanned by strangers seems rude, but please don't accidentally kill anyone. The paperwork would be terrible." Her patterns shifted through several colors before settling on a dim blue. The equipment stopped sparking. "This unit will comply, reluctantly, with extreme prejudice held in reserve." That's the spirit. The scans took 20 minutes, during which Shavireth arranged his tools into complex geometric patterns on the pod's floor, and hummed at a frequency that made his molars ache. The hazmat team looked increasingly confused, their equipment giving readings that apparently made no sense. Finally, they cleared the pod for exit, though the lead balloon looked like he wanted to argue about it. Rion helped Shavireth through the airlock, supporting her when she stumbled. She was weak, he realized, running on fumes and pride. Her patterns had dimmed to barely visible pulses. "Food," she said quietly. "This unit requires energy, light, sound, resonance with living things. I've got ration bars that taste like cardboard and coffee that tastes worse. Will that work? This unit has consumed worse. Probably, royal feasts are very boring." They made it 3 steps into the station proper before the crowd descended. The maintenance tunnels under Kepler Station smelled like recycled water and broken dreams, which Rion supposed was appropriate given his current situation. Shavireth crouched beside him in the cramped space, her 4 arms folded in ways that shouldn't have been comfortable but apparently were. Her bioluminescent patterns had brightened after consuming 3 ration bars, 2 cups of terrible coffee, and inexplicably, a potted plant from the station's hydroponics bay that she'd assured him was requesting to be consumed. "So let me understand human sarcasm," she said, her patterns shifting to curious yellow. "When you say the Galactic Authority captain seems super reasonable, you mean the opposite. You're getting it. And when you told her that hiding me would be no problem at all, you also meant the opposite, yes. Human communication is exhausting." She paused, then added, "This unit is being sarcastic now. I'm so proud." Above them, boots thundered through the corridors. Captain Thessa Morrow had arrived with her warship, and what sounded like half her crew, all searching for one alien queen who technically might be a war criminal or a priceless scientific discovery, or possibly both. Rion had heard at least 15 different theories shouted in the past hour, each more creative than the last. Shavireth touched the tunnel wall and her patterns pulsed once. The metal hummed in response, a sound that Rion felt in his chest. "This station is sick," she said. "Infrastructure failing, life support inefficient, the walls are lonely." "The walls are what now?" "All things have resonance. Your people build without listening, my people." She trailed off, patterns dimming. "My people built too well, created things that lived too long, remembered too much. The throne, the crown, the caste system, all alive, all demanding, all." She made a sound like shattering glass. "Wrong." Rion's scanner chirped. He checked it and swore. "They're doing thermal sweeps. They'll find us in maybe 10 minutes." This unit could interface with station systems, make us invisible to their scans, could control every system, every door, every— She stopped, looking at her hands. This unit could enslave everyone here, would be easy, expected, royal prerogative. But you won't. No. Her patterns shifted to something soft, almost sad. This unit is tired of being expected, of duty, of crown. She reached up and touched the bone structure on her skull. Kelvreth always said the crown chose wrong, that I was weak. Perhaps he was correct. The scanner chirped again, more urgently. Rion pulled up the station schematic, looking for options. We could try to make it to the cargo bays. There's a personal transport I've had my eye on. Well, my debt-ridden eye. That running will not solve. Shavireth stopped mid-sentence, her patterns flashing red. They come, the other, luminary signal, but wrong, modified. Kelvreth. Your ex is here. This is like the worst breakup ever. The tunnel wall exploded inward with a scream of tortured metal. A figure stepped through the breach, and Rion understood immediately why Shavireth had used the word modified. Kelvreth might have been luminary once, but now he was something else. His body had been rebuilt with angular, aggressive augmentations, his natural bioluminescence replaced with harsh red lighting that pulsed like an angry heartbeat. Two of his arms ended in weapons that looked grown rather than built. Shavireth, he said, and his voice was wrong too, layered with harmonics that made Rion's ears hurt. The failed queen, still running, still weak. Kelvreth. Shavireth stood, drawing herself to full height. Even weakened, she had presence. Still compensating, still loud. Your sarcasm, Rion whispered, this unit practices. Kelvreth's patterns flashed with what might have been amusement. The humans have taught you their crude communication. How fitting. The crown chooses lower and lower. He raised one weapon arm. The old lines must end. The luminary must evolve beyond royal stagnation. Agree, Shavireth said, and both Rion and Kelvreth froze. The crown is burden, the old ways are death. She reached up with all four hands and grasped the bone crown. So this unit chooses no more crown, no more queen. Wait, Rion said, but she was already pulling. The crown didn't want to release. It was alive, had been part of her for decades, woven into her skull and her consciousness. Tearing it free meant tearing away part of herself. Her patterns flashed white with pain, and the sound she made was like stars dying. Blood, darker than human blood, ran down her face. The crown came away in pieces, fragments of bone and crystal and genetic memory spanning thousands of years. She dropped them at her feet and stood there, blood-streaked and trembling, holding herself upright through pure will. No more throne, she said, her voice barely a whisper. No more destiny. Luminari choose their own path now. Including you, Kelvreth. For a moment nothing moved in the tunnel. Then Kelvreth's patterns shifted, cycling through colors Rion had never seen, processing something that clearly broke every expectation. His weapon arms lowered. You abdicate. This unit quits, resigns, gives notice. Many human terms exist for freedom. Kelvreth stood frozen, and Rion realized the truth. The rebellion, the violence, all of it had been about forcing change on a system that seemed immutable. Shavireth had just made it all irrelevant by walking away. What do we do now? Kelvreth asked, and he sounded lost. Whatever we choose, Shavireth said. Revolutionary concept. Captain Morrow arrived with her troops 30 seconds later, finding a scene that clearly wasn't in any manual. Rion raised his hands. Shavireth swayed but remained standing. Kelvreth's weapon arms had retracted into something approaching normal limbs. Morrow looked at the broken crown pieces on the floor, then at Shavireth. You're abdicating. Past tense. This unit has abdicated is now just Shavireth. Individual person, free agent. She looked at Rion, correct terminology. Close enough. Then I'm arresting just Shavireth, Morrow said slowly, clearly working through implications. Who is? Nobody, Shavireth said. Everybody. Person who would like coffee and ration bars and to not be shot. Reasonable requests. Mara holstered her weapon. This is either the greatest diplomatic coup of my career or the worst decision I'll ever make. She looked at Rion. You're still fired. Worth it. 3 days later, after negotiations that gave Morrow stress headaches and Yashi a promotion, Rion and Shavireth stood in the docking bay beside a small transport ship. It was barely flight-worthy, held together by patches and prayers, but it was theirs. Paid for by Galactic Authority bounty for diplomatic resolution of potential crisis, which was a fancy way of saying they were grateful nobody had died. Kelvreth had left with others of his kind, talking about building something new. The station was already growing strange crystalline structures in its walls where Shavireth had touched them, making systems more efficient, happier somehow. The walls hummed contentedly. Ready? Rion asked. Shavireth touched her bare skull where the crown had been. The wounds had healed, but scars remained, patterns of her own making now. This unit is terrified, excited, free. Many contradictory states. Welcome to being human. We're all terrified all the time. Comforting, she picked up the coffee maker she'd insisted on keeping. This unit brings weapon for safety. It's still not a weapon. Agree to disagree. They boarded together, two exiles with no throne, no destiny, just a broken ship and the infinite possibility of space ahead. As they lifted off, Shavireth began arranging the control panel instruments into geometric patterns. Stop that, Rion said. This unit believes you are being sarcastic. I'm really not. But he was smiling, and so was she. And the stars waited for them with the patience of things that had seen empires rise and fall and knew that sometimes the best thing was just two people choosing kindness when the universe expected fear. The transport jumped to hyperspace, trailing light like laughter, and Kepler station's walls